Shifting to politics, let's begin with a quick review and analysis of the polls from the last week. To begin with, President Trump's average job approval rating in 4 polls was at 43.5%, and the average of 4 direction of the country polls indicates that 61.25% of Americans believe we're headed in the wrong direction. What's interesting to note is that despite these troubling numbers, the most recent Economist YouGov poll reveals the closest general election numbers I've seen recently, showing Biden up just 3 points nationally over Trump, and the latest CNBC poll showed the identical 3-point margin for Biden. Furthermore, the most recent Economist YouGov poll shows that Americans prefer Democrats over Republicans in a generic congressional situation by 8 points. But the most recent Economist YouGov poll also shows that only 21% of Americans approve of the job that Congress is doing. So in short, the American people hate Congress, but they nevertheless appear to like congressional Democrats more than they like Joe Biden. But the news isn't all bad for Biden, as the most recent polls have shown him up on Trump in Florida, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Virginia, and Wisconsin, while Biden seems to be closing in on Trump in Texas, Georgia, Utah, Missouri, and Iowa. Now listen, if there's one thing we learned in 2016, it's that polls aren't the end-all be-all, but it is certainly fascinating to digest this information. At this point, it seems like Joe Biden is probably the favorite, but it should be noted that Hillary was a much heavier favorite over Trump last time around at this point than Biden is this time around at this point. I also wanted to briefly touch on 2 more domestic political issues before moving into international news followed by COVID-19 coverage. First, on the Biden vice presidential choice, I recently saw some very interesting polling data. We're told that Kamala Harris is the clear frontrunner in the Biden camp at the moment, but Liz Warren seems to be the clear favorite of registered Democrat voters. According to a CBS News poll from the first week of May, 71% of Democrats believe Liz Warren should be considered for VP, compared with 59% of Democrats who believe Kamala Harris should be considered for VP. Furthermore, 36% of Democrats believe Liz Warren should be the VP nominee, compared with just 19% of Democrats who believe Kamala Harris should get the VP nod. Of course, there are lots of conflicting factors for Biden to consider before making this choice. For some, Liz Warren's liberal stances energize, and for some, they repel. Whereas Kamala Harris's policies soothe some, and her more moderate positions antagonize others. And Liz Warren's whiteness and Kamala Harris's blackness also cut both ways, with large swaths of voters. But regardless of the many factors in play, it was surprising to discover the Democratic voters have such a clear preference for Liz Warren over Kamala Harris. In addition to Biden's VP choice, I wanted to touch on the Supreme Court. In the aftermath of Mitch McConnell refusing to allow even a hearing for Merrick Garland, liberal anxiety spiked substantially about the Supreme Court potentially tilting radically to the right. So I wanted to share some reassuring information that I recently compiled. Since Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh have taken their oaths, 21 out of the 36 Supreme Court cases featured a 9-0 unanimous decision. That's 58% of the time. And only 5 out of the 36 cases featured a 5-4 decision, and one of those 5 featured liberal justices Sotomayor and Ginsburg siding with conservative justices Thomas and Alito. That means that just 11%, 4 out of 36, of the cases this court has heard ended in a 5-4 decision with the 5 conservative justices siding together against the 4 liberal justices. Furthermore, I was interested to discover there have only been 3 cases that ended with a 6-3 choice, and 2 of those 3 cases involved both Brett Kavanaugh and John Roberts voting with the liberal justices. In short, while the American people may be intensely divided along partisan lines at the moment, there's little evidence to suggest that the Supreme Court is following a similarly perilous, hyper-partisan path.